So you're the wolf of all streets. You should be able to see this, open the door and look into I know
man.
You're crying inside.
Listen.
I know you're crying inside. Scott is one of the best journalists in the space. Trump must bend the knee, and he will bend the knee. I'm a vibe amplifier. Scott of the Wolf of All Streets, the only content I watch in the space. Good luck.
That's dope.
Because you might have heard him say that I have journalistic integrity.
Right, Scott is one of the best journalists in the space. I'm happy to be back with you again at Bitcoin conference here in Nashville. Scott, the wolf of all streets.
Yeah, the check is in the mail.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks again.
Stacey, I'll send it to her. Yeah, it's 2024. I was just saying to Stacey privately, I can't believe this. It's like it's become Coachella. And she said, 2010 still feels like it's the first 100 of us, and I don't really know what's going on. Can you honestly believe it's this big?
Well, I think right now we're at, if you look at the internet growth period, the moment when, remember, Netscape went public, and you had that hockey stick movement of adoption. I think that's the moment. I think that's what this festival represents. And now we're going to see just an onboarding of 1 billion people, and Bitcoin will become ubiquitous in the way the internet is.
It's interesting because in our echo chamber, I think we all are blown away by the political movement and that we're being talked about like this, but I don't think that's actually hit mainstream at all. But I have a feeling this might be actually what makes that happen. When the mainstream media, for better or for worse, actually covers this event.
Well, it's becoming an issue in the 2024 election cycle, and every politician now has to have an opinion about Bitcoin. And so, therefore, I think you could say it is pretty much entering the mainstream. Even people who have never talked about Bitcoin before, they're being forced to really have an opinion about it. And so they're being forced to learn something about it. So I think the politicization of Bitcoin, which Bitcoiners have resisted throughout the entire history of Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is for everybody. You can't stop where it's going. It's on its own vector. And right now it's hitting, the political spectrum, and it's making waves, and so we should have expected this. And this, I think, to your point, though, is when we see that mainstream adoption hit that we saw on the internet back in the late 90s.
You touched on that, though. It's kind of weird because the entire point of Bitcoin, certainly the reason I'm assuming you got in, was opt out of all this shit completely.
Well, I think that Bitcoin is a central bank killer. I also think that it's a nation state killer. And so the politicians like President Bukele in El Salvador is very savvy about this. And really, the project in El Salvador is about dismantling the legacy nation-state model and coming up with a new decentralized model for governance. And I think that will sweep the globe as well. So I always say that money existed before the state. Bitcoin separates money from state. Bitcoin kills the state. And that's what we're going to see happen.
Trump had some negative comments about Bukele, obviously, of late, and you pulled no punches in commenting on it, which I was very surprised. You're usually so muted and, reserved.
Yes. Right. Well, Donald Trump took a pot shot at the president, and obviously he feels threatened by Bukele because Bukele is the most popular leader in the world, not Donald Trump. So it's like the Wicked Witch in the forest, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? And the mirror says, President Bukele in El Salvador, not you, bitch. And so he reacted like a jealous lover or a spurned lover, and he's jealous, and he should be, because Bukele's younger, Bitcoin is legal tender in El Salvador, we've got crime now down to near 0%, everything Bukele is rolling out is working, and so Donald Trump and the United States are playing catch up. They have to catch up to El Salvador. El Salvador is now the new shining city on a hill. The Statue of Liberty now, it's a volcano in El Salvador. El Salvador is about economic freedom, not the United States, not Europe, of course. So, Donald Trump has work to do. That's the way he likes to come on. He likes to antagonize people and try to jazz things up. But I think in the case of Bukele and Bitcoin, he's fighting an insurmountable foe. But Trump must bend the knee, and he will bend the knee, as all do to Satoshi and Bitcoin. He's not quite at the stage yet where he understands that. He will, the sooner the better. Good luck.
That was my next question. So we saw this wholesale pivot from Trump. It gained a lot of momentum. It was politically popular. He captured the zeitgeist of this crowd. Do you think it's genuine? Like, do you think he's been orange pilled? Do you think it's purely political, or maybe he's on the spectrum that we've seen so many people go through when they sort of find out about it, slowly do the work, and
Yeah, he's on the spectrum. And Donald Trump is first and foremost a businessman, and he thinks in those terms. And so the appeal of Bitcoin finally started to make sense to him. He's starting to understand it. I think Bitcoin Magazine has done an excellent job, and David Bailey has done an excellent job orange pilling the president, Donald Trump, the former president. And now we let the awareness percolate in the brain. And, you know, it takes a while, and people start to get into that rabbit hole, and then they become maximalists, right?
Yeah.
That's the journey. So he started that journey. I think it is genuine in that sense, and that once you kind of start to open the door and look into the Bitcoin protocol and start to understand what's going on here, you can't really go back. As Michael Saylor has said, nobody who has spent at least 100 hours studying Bitcoin has ever said anything negative about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right? The more you learn, the higher the conviction. And that's one of the reasons why the price is just going to continue to go up, and especially against all other shitcoins. And you see what's happening with ETH, Scott. You know, they did the ETF, and the price has been dropping because
could thank Grayscale for that.
yeah, you know, well, they invited more scrutiny into ETH. And the more you scrutinize ETH, it's the opposite. The less you like ETH, the more you study it, because the more it becomes obvious that there's no reason for it to exist. And so it's dropping like a stone. I think the ETF with ETH will be its swan song, you know, at the end of ETH.
Do you think that all the things that are being built there effectively were a test net for things that will future be built on Bitcoin? Or are you also sort of skeptical of this explosion of innovation on Bitcoin? Because I would argue that 90% of it is the same cash grabbers that just go protocol to protocol and try to go where the money is and it's popular. But I would imagine that some of it's going to genuinely be really impactful technology.
Everything goes to zero against Bitcoin. Some of the shitcoins, you know, Litecoin is where a segregated witness, I believe, rolled out first, right? So that was a test net for Bitcoin. And different projects have been test nets for Bitcoin to some degree, because, you know, the progress of Bitcoin down the development path, it was very slow. And people like Roger Ver, you know, did a hard fork. He grew impatient and decided he needed to hard fork Bitcoin. And that has not really worked. Craig Wright, of course, has met his comeuppance. Ultimately, he finally discovered law.
Is that not the most satisfying thing you've ever seen maybe in your whole life? He has a website that's court ordered to be up that says he's not Satoshi and was forced to tweet it.
Yeah.
It's one thing for the court to say it. It's another thing for them to make you say it and leave it up.
Well, you know, Bitcoin is the magic mirror, and it exposes people for who they really are. If you're a born crook like Craig Wright, you'll be more of a crook. If you are more of a righteous person with humanity on your mind, like I believe Michael Saylor is really a good character and a good person, Bitcoin allowed him to express himself in a grander vision because it's that magic mirror effect. It's in the political arena. It's showing who's real and who's fake. And it's exposing a lot of corrupt politicians doing dirty things, because Bitcoin is a standard upon which everything else looks bad. What used to pass in American politics, like Nancy Pelosi trading on inside information, people would just say moral relativism would kick in and say, well, everybody's doing it and she is a good person anyway, so we'll let it slide. But when you have something like a measure of perfection and a measure of moral rectitude like Bitcoin, everything else that's even slightly dodgy looks very dodgy, because now finally you have a standard by which to compare these things to. Perfect money, Bitcoin. And we're seeing that play out globally. We're seeing it play out in the US politically. We're seeing it play out in El Salvador. And this year, and in this conference, is probably the kickoff for a major global move into Bitcoin.
If Trump wins, how much of the promises or statements do you think will come true? Do you think we could be utterly dismissed and it was just another campaign sort of bluster? Or do you think that, like, now there's so much momentum and people have gotten behind him? I guess what I'm asking is, give him 4 years, where do you think we land as far as policy 4 years into it?
Don't forget, Scott, that Donald Trump is sitting on a powder keg of explosives and he's lighting matches, and that powder keg is called the US dollar.
He added 7 or 8 trillion in debt in his 4 years.
All fiat money is similarly worthless. And all fiat money throughout history always essentially goes and loses 99 to 100% of purchasing power. And the US dollar will be no exception. So he and all politicians are dealing with fiat money, and it's all looking like garbage compared to Bitcoin. You get Bitcoin at the price you deserve. So Donald Trump can dilly-dally, and he can try to pretend like this is not an inevitable path that Bitcoin's taking, a global Bitcoin standard, for as long as he wants. And ultimately, he will bend the knee, and ultimately, Bitcoin doesn't care. It's on its own vector. It's on its own path. It's going to obliterate the fiat money world, and it's demonetizing gold. It's demonetizing the S&P. The Bitcoin ETF is now bigger, I believe, than the S&P ETF.
BlackRock's ETF alone, so that's one of the many, has done more volume than QQQ, which is it's insane.
QQQ is the Nasdaq,
yes,
right?
Correct.
Okay,
so it's done more volume now in this year, and didn't even have the first few weeks.
So it's demonetizing traditional legacy finance, TradFi. So you're the wolf of Wall Street. You should be able to see this.
I do.
I'm
a skeptic, like any of us, when it comes to depending on anybody else besides ourselves. The reason we're here is self-custody and opt-out. You know what I mean? So it makes me wonder, since you've been a part of a political process elsewhere, what you think we might see. I interviewed Kennedy yesterday, and he said he would add as much Bitcoin as gold in the reserve. He would match the gold in the reserve in his presidency with as much Bitcoin. Listen, it's bluster. I know that.
What's great is that they're picking up on the talking points, right? Bitcoin versus gold is a talking point that's been kicking around the Bitcoin space for a decade, since 2011. I was at the first Bitcoin conference in Prague in 2011. Bitcoin was $1, and a couple of people were making the point that Bitcoin should be comparable to gold in market cap. Is it Jeffrey Tucker, or another? He's a monetary theorist, and he wears very nice clothes all the time. Sorry, I mangled your name.
No, it's okay.
But
Bob Boberson, the great economist.
Yeah, and I'll think of it, of course, when this interview's over.
You'll be at 2:00 in the morning tonight. You're going to sit up and be like,
see, I'm trying to give somebody else credit for saying something smart, which intrinsically
it's hard. It doesn't work. It's like, I can see the.
I always give myself credit for all the smart things that I say and all the smart things that Michael Saylor says. I always give myself credit. Let's move on.
Yeah.
So the politicalization of Bitcoin is just a step in the path of decentralizing the political arena entirely, and the nation state as we know it, like central banks as we know them, is going to fall. They're going to fall.
Okay, so last question. What can we expect from you at this conference? You've been known to be very calm and never rip up money or say fuck certain tech billionaires. So, No,
I always come into the events completely tabula rasa, empty. I just listen and I hear what's going on, and I try to get a feeling for what the audience and what the people are thinking and doing, and I try to channel that and I amplify it. So I had the sense when I said fuck Elon a couple of years ago, there was a sense in the audience that people were upset that Elon had sold a bunch of Bitcoin, and they had reneged on
the buy a Tesla with Bitcoin.
Right. Bitcoin. So
which nobody in their right mind would do, by the way, but hey.
Right. But there was a sense that, fuck Elon was kind of like on the fringe.
Yeah.
So
you brought it
to amplify things, and it got a big reaction. So I'm just trying to amplify what I hear that's going on and give it voice and give it some stage presence. So that's just like I reflect what was going on out with the crowd, right? So my agenda is to give the crowd a voice. And the same thing with the shows that I've done, Keiser Report, that we've done in other shows. It's an attempt to amplify what people are saying more than try to kind of go with my own agenda, really. I'm just trying to hear what's happening and amplify that. And that's what I would do here. So I just came, bumped into you. I don't know, we're speaking on Saturday morning. It'll be about El Salvador. I've been vocal on Twitter criticizing Trump's criticism of El Salvador, and that may or may not come up, but we'll see what the vibe is. I have no agenda other than to amplify the vibe. I'm a vibe amplifier.
We call that a hype man, where I'm from.
I'm all about the hype.
He's the Flavor Flav of El Salvador and crypto.
down with the hype. You know, that's definitely why not. You know,
I'm just wondering, like, how long I'm gonna have to wait in line to get past Secret Service just to hear you speak.
I don't know, but I'm sure the security is going to be pretty tight, and because I think Trump is scheduled to speak later
Saturday
today.
afternoon, yeah.
I come with no preconceptions. You know, I just try to go with the flow and see what's going on. I'm glad I bumped into you, Scott of the Wolf of Wall Streets. The only content I watch in the space because it's balanced. It's very balanced.
I try.
You know,
I talk about all the things.
Shit coins, but you do so in a way that I can read your eyes. I
Hey,
know
man.
you're crying inside.
Listen.
I know you're crying inside.
I've always yes. I've got my own opinions on all of that, but I agree. I think there's Bitcoin, and then there's a whole lot of stuff that you can have fun with, but it ain't Bitcoin. It's always what I've believed, and it's always been my approach. Thank you, man. I don't want to keep any more time. This was totally impromptu. We bumped into each other.
Well, thanks
But
again,
I'm
and
glad.
maybe we'll do something later on.
Yeah, we're gonna do something in the next couple days for
All
sure.
right,
Thanks, Max,
Scott.
man.
See
Have a
ya.
great conference.
All right.
That's dope.